Hello, and welcome to another episode of Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers.
By writers.
To keep you writing.
I'm Nick.
I'm LP.
I'm Shingai.
And I'm Sameem.
And this week, we've got Sameem in our hot seat. But before we dive in and tell you guys what's going on, quick reminders of things that are happening for us soon. If you haven't joined our newsletter, please do that. We push it out once a month. On a monthly basis there. You can find out what's going on, not only in our community with past episodes, upcoming episodes, things like that. Shingai, you've got something coming out soon, don't you?
I do. I have a novelette coming out in the Deadlands in September, so look out for that.
All right. Obviously, when that gets launched, follow us on our social media and newsletter, and we'll tell you guys all about it. We'll dive into that one too. So be expecting that, Shingai. Just a little forewarning, if you will, here.
Everyone gets the hot seat.
Exactly. Sameem, you're in the hot seat tonight. We're going to deep dive into one of your short stories tonight. And I'm going to kick it off. Sameem, which story are we diving into tonight?
We're diving into AirBody, which was published in Clarkesworld in April 2020.
Shingai's going to take lead, but we got a couple questions before we turn it over to Shingai for you. Sameem, describe writing this short story in 3 words.
Cerebral, tactile, and surreal.
All right, let's unpack those a little bit. Those are words for sure. Cerebral. What is that?
I guess it was a pretty stream of conscious story. And so it was very much exploring. The person is given the premise of the story is living in their own brain and sort of somewhat out of body for themselves to be observing themselves and what's going on. So I think that's where that comes from.
Okay, there's some good follow-up questions to come from that for sure. Now, tactile, not a word I would have expected.
There's the physical experience of the person cooking through the story. And when I first started working on the story and I hit that point, or I decided that was going to take up a lot of space in the story, and when I decided what they're going to be cooking, I stopped writing. I was at a writing group meeting working on this, and I stopped working. I packed up my stuff. I was like, I gotta go, and I went to the South Asian grocery store nearby, bought all the ingredients, and I taught myself. And I called my mom, and I taught myself how to cook this thing, and did it. Enjoyed the experience, and didn't come back to the story for 6 or 7 months. That's a side note, but I guess that's what I meant by tactile, just the physical experience of going through the motions of the story. I think I also went through the motions of what it was like to register as an Airbnb host, to get a sense of what do you have to consider in that process and how much of that would actually be applicable.
That is interesting. Okay.
Wait, did you like what you ate? Was it good?
It was good.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a mess, but it was good. Definitely not how my mom made it, but
I feel like good cooking has to be a mess.
All right, and then surreal.
I think that's my favorite word.
Yeah.
That you've used to describe this.
In terms of to describe it. Yeah, I think it was. I think the story, the experience of writing it, and the way it just came together, all of those feel surreal to me. And this bleeds out of the story and into life, but it was published. I got the acceptance a few weeks before lockdown, and it was published a few weeks after lockdown. So that whole period of my life also just feels very surreal. So just multiple layers there.
I think a lot of us, 2020 was a weird year.
Yeah.
But I'm really I am glad, knowing what 2020 turned out to be, that you had this. and kind of the words that are associated with it too. I know we're going to talk about some of the stuff you already mentioned. Stream of consciousness when you're writing, it just kind of came. Like, I do want to dive into your process here because I'm very interested in that aspect too. But like, I'm glad this came when it came, knowing what we know now and looking back on it. How did you feel when you got that acceptance?
That was.
I know I'm out of order. I don't care.
You're so out of order.
Yeah, that experience was surreal. Was like I was waiting for the rejection, and it got held. So I was like, oh great, now I have to wait longer for the rejection. And so when the acceptance came in, like it was like a Saturday afternoon. I was home with my daughter, and like I felt like I was floating. It was like unreal. And my daughter was like 4 at the time. Not even 4 yet. She was like 3.5. And I like explained to her why I was so excited. And she got super excited. And she was like, can you teach me how to write a story too? So like the whole thing was just like, I don't know, a really like beautiful moment for me.
Kids are precious.
Yeah.
Sameem, could you pitch AirBody to a stranger?
That's really hard. I guess I would say it's like an exploration of intergenerational like immigrant drift through the lens of technology and food and love.
That's a great pitch.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Because those are all the elements that like I picked up on when I read it the first time. So I do want to mention though, like aren't you a finalist in 2021 for this as well?
Yeah, it was a finalist for the Sturgeon Award. It won the Clark's World Reader's Choice poll that year. And it made it to a few best of anthologies. So
sorry, I'm not going to let you slip by without having those accolades attached to this short story here without talking about it, sir. Shingai, I'm going to pass the time over to you. You've got a couple questions lined up for us.
I do. Thank you so much, Nick. Okay. So, Sameem, are you ready?
I don't know.
Don't worry, I'm not gonna hurt you. My first question is this. First of all, let me just say, like, as someone who is Sapphic leaning and from the global South, the twist in this story got to my soul and my heart. And I felt very seen and also a little bit heartbroken by the end of the story when Mina's character is with her lover. Well, am I supposed to not give spoilers? Whoops.
You know what? This is what I'm gonna say. The story has been out since 2020. It's been 4 years. I'm gonna say content warning. There are spoilers here. It is a short story. If you haven't picked it up, check our show notes, listen to it. We also have the podcast version of it as well if you need audio. But there will be spoilers from this point forward.
Thank you. Did you always know who Mina's character was going to be? That's my question.
No, I don't think I did.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I can talk a little bit about like where the story came from. It came out of a writing prompt, actually. I had an awesome writing group in Oakland when I still live in California. That was like speculative fiction writers of color. It's a reason why I didn't want to leave California, is that's a lot harder to find anywhere else, or at least in the DC area. And the prompt that one of my like group members had was just come up with a story plot about a world where you can like occupy other bodies. And I don't remember exactly how the prompt was phrased, but it was like the prompt was phrased in a really like dark and dystopian way. And I think the story is dystopian in a lot of ways. But I was like, we're living in the Bay. I'm going to make this like tech bro-ish and play with that. And so I don't think I like went into the story with a mission at all. It was just like, this is a fun concept that I want to play with. And I think I said a lot of things with it about what I was speaking about without even like necessarily intending to at first. Yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah. Okay, I was asking about Mina, the character, and your answer actually leads to a follow-up question that I have, which is about how the story directly speaks to what most of us who grew up reading were drawn to, which is the possibility of embodying someone else's life while also escaping your own life, even if it's just for a little bit, for a brief respite. And I was wondering how you would contextualize that, especially in this moment. And I'm thinking about the work of the speculative writer as one who builds empathy, and also one of the things that Sameem, you and I have been talking about in a lot of the episodes where we've been on together is expanding the imagination. So how embodying someone else's life literally expands the possibilities of what a life could be.
Yeah, that's a good question. Can we like narrow it a little bit? Like, are you asking what the role of the like speculative fiction writers is in creating that empathy or that escape?
I think,
or both.
Yes, but more specifically you, like how your work encounters expanding the imagination of a possible life, and also embodying other people's lives, because that's what you literally wrote about in this story, which is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard. I think I draw on often what I don't get to see or read. And people who I know for a fact exist, who don't often get a voice. And not necessarily like the most oppressed or the most privileged. Like I feel like I float somewhere in the middle. Because I think in many ways, both of these characters are very privileged. Like, I don't go super deep into that, but they have access to a lot of things that most other people don't, regardless of the issues that they have going on. Yet there's really important ways in which to like, they lack privilege. And so I think for me, it was important to explore how people make use of the privilege that they do have to make amends to that and remedy it. Yeah, does that answer your question?
No, it does. Yeah, I think it does to some degree. I think it also reminds me of what you said about how the characters are drifters. And LP has a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, one of the words that you used to describe the writing of the story was tactile, which was interesting that you used that to talk about the writing of the story, because I just felt like the characters were so very embodied. Like, I feel like in a lot of times that I'm reading, I'm not in someone's skin. I'm not responding to olfactory stimuli. I'm not tasting things. And like, I really felt that in this story. And I'm curious, how did you go about recreating these very real sensations that you communicated and then I felt as a reader?
I mean, I think some of them I had to experience myself. and be really thoughtful about it as I was experiencing it. So like the process of cooking, the process of like tasting in the middle, the process of like, I don't know, like sampling it when it's incomplete, tasting it when it's done, sharing it with other people, like the whole experience. I think I had to like embody myself before I could write it. And I think there was like, I think like the, I guess, false thesis of the story to start off with is like, hey, here's like 4 archetypes of millions of this category of millions of people and I can break it down and it's so simple. And I think I had to let myself experience bits and pieces of that, not just for the story in general, but I think the story helped me explore it even more, to really understand and share how what like a terrible premise that is, and how complex people actually are, and like it's really fun in like. And I don't know if every immigrant community is like this, but in like the South Asian community, to like roll your eyes at like auntie and uncle stereotypes, and not necessarily give them the full lives that they have lived, and the trauma and pain that they've gone through. Yeah.
I actually thought that was a really great opening to the story. There was like, well, there's 4 archetypes, but nobody really adheres to all of them. But I loved it because it just made me ask questions. It was like, because what do I know about Desi aunties? The answer is very little.
That's true for everybody. So,
okay, great.
Well, I think that's what I really like about like reading your work and Shingai's work and LP's, all you guys really. Is bringing in a different culture I'm not used to, and reading this now, right? You know, after having such a like, I feel like over the last couple years, there's been a lot more representation from from Southeast Asian. Am I correct?
South Asian.
South Asian community, on TV, in movies, and things like that. And so seeing that, like, and reading it now, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I resonate a little bit more with it because I've seen it a bit more. Now, for you kind of going through this story and stuff like that and wanting to be representative, how did you decide what to include in a short story and what not to include in a short story?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because like there's so much that goes into it, and like obviously you did things for a certain reason. I'm just curious, like, how did you choose what to bring in from your culture for this one?
I don't know if I was that thoughtful about it. I think I was like, I'm not going to filter. I'm going to use the language I want to use, talk about the concepts I want to talk about, and worry about, hey, are people going to get it later on? And I did. I think I did get feedback from like my most trusted feedback partners that like, hey, this might be a little bit more than people are going to get. And so I think there were places where I like toned down like my use of Urdu here and there, maybe, but not much. I was like pretty stubborn about it from like the cultural aspects. So I think this was the story where I got feedback that said that like the South Asian references don't add much to the story. It might have been a different story, but I could have easily gotten on this one too. I got another point of feedback that was like, this is when I was like getting broader feedback from more places that was like, that the auntie didn't sound foreign enough. So I think I was like, I guess to answer your question, Nick, I think I was just like, I don't care. I'm going to like put in what feels like I would enjoy reading.
Yeah. I'm mad for you right now, if I'm being honest. Like, look, and this is like it. I'm coming from a perspective of like, I'm all for people learning. I'm all for people reading other people's stories, learning from each other, giving each other feedback. But like, look, how dumb is it to tell someone, "Oh, your auntie's not foreign enough"? I mean, I already know the characteristics of this person that gave your feedback, right? Like, that's the unfortunate side. I just want to like kind of stand my ground right now. And if y'all are going to give feedback to someone who does not look like you, come from your same culture, like you need to do your research before giving any type of feedback in regards to someone else's culture. Like, we need, like, as a writing community, get better about this shit. Like, I've heard it from almost everybody on our show that someone says something like this all the time. So if you're giving feedback to someone, do your research before you make comments like that. Because now, I mean, it helped with the story, I guess, at the end of the day, right? So, I mean, you wanted to write what you want and you didn't care, right? And you put yourself in a place of being stubborn. But
I think I was lucky that when I started working on the story, I already had like enough confidence in what I was doing, or indifference to what people thought. I don't know which one it was, where that kind of feedback was entertaining for me more than anything else. And so I think every writer, I hope, will reach a point in their writing career where they can look at the feedback they get. Because I feel like a lot of early writers, unless you're like, I don't know, super, super arrogant starting off, everyone in the beginning is like, all the feedback is right. And I'm terrible at everything. So I've got to listen to everything. And I think as you develop and you learn, you get to pick and understand, like, this feedback is someone's perspective. It's not what I'm going for, and I'm going to pass on it. Mm-hmm. Versus like, oh, this is really valuable. What the person is telling me to fix might not be the right way to fix it, but it's telling me something is wrong here and I need to rethink it. Yeah. To like, oh, this person is right and I got to take their advice. Like, there's different levels of it. So
yeah, for sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on a rant there, but I get upset over this shit. I don't know why, but I just do. I mean, fortunately, I've had to watch too many of you guys get crappy feedback like this. So
I wouldn't call myself a aficionado of JC culture, but like, I guess for me, like the hallmark of a great story is that, like, you know, whether or not I take the time to go and look up the thing that I don't understand, if I can still stay on the story, then like it doesn't matter. Like, like my ignorance won't stop me from enjoying a story, and I love that for me. But I think that sometimes people can get too caught up on like their experience of a story to like, I had to stop to look something up. It took me out of the world. I was like, well, okay, that's fine. Maybe the story's not for you. Maybe Sameem wrote this for other Desi people, for other Pakistani people. And
well, I've always liked stories that make you work. That I don't understand, right? Like, if I understand a book right off the bat in the first reading, I actually will stop reading it. Like, partly because like it takes a lot of effort for me to read. And so if I'm going to do it, I want it to be like a really enlightening experience, I guess. Yeah. I want it to like, I want to work for it. And so if it's a very straightforward story, like, sometimes I'll do it, but I'm like, I'll watch the movie instead in that case. Whereas like if it's someone who's using writing as like a multi-layered tool, then I'm into it.
Yeah.
Shingai, pass it back to you.
Thank you. I think the question that I have based off of that, I keep coming back to the term that you used for these characters, like the idea of them being drifters. I just read a book called Vagabonds by Elogosa. And it focuses on the characters in society that are on the outskirts in different ways. The vagabonds, right? The ones who aren't tied down to the idea of normalcy, of being the good, nice, regular person. And your story reminded me of these characters, especially because, like you said, they're both dealing with being in the diaspora, these two characters, and with trying to both escape their life and carry their life into other lives. I am curious about whether you see yourself in that lineage of drifting and vagabondness. or family or people in your, who are in your immediate vicinity. I guess my question is the inspiration behind the story where that came from. Yeah.
Yeah, I think drifting is a really good term for it. I think, I don't know if I understood this by this story, but I think at some point in that year before or after I wrote the story, through my writing, I think in realizing the theme, like immigration or migration is a recurring theme in like everything I write. And I had this realization that like, as far back as like my family tree goes, there's like migration in every generation. And there's not like, I have friends who are also from immigrant families, but they have like an ancestral like village or something like that. And that's such a weird concept for me. And I think, it might be one reason why, like from a pretty young age, the whole idea of nationalism was also like super absurd to me. Cause I'm like, what the fuck? We all came from different places and we're all going different places. So what's the point of this? And so I think I feel very comfortable with like the drifter identity, because I feel like it's an acceptance of impermanence, if that makes sense. And I think a reality for so many people, that I think having a place, might be getting into a tangent here, but having a place where you're welcome and the whole you is welcome, without giving pieces of yourself away. There's a lot of us who don't have that. And I think that these two characters are two characters who don't have that. And I think you see that like there are other characters who in the story specifically who have given out pieces of themselves to find that security and safety. And so these two main characters are two that like haven't really done that, and continue to drift and live in the ins and outs of societies as they're allowed to.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, LP.
Yeah, so I'm kind of in love with these ideas of like what I call a reactive protagonist, right? So like, there's a clear protagonist to me, and they share physical and or psychic space with another person, which like complicates it a lot. And there's not a particularly huge conflict that someone needs to overcome in order for the story to find its resolution. And like, I feel like people privilege that over any other kind of story. And I just like that the story is so, it's just so intimate on like so many levels. What made you decide to create something so I don't want to say internal, but it is internal, but like there's external stuff going on too. But like what caused you to go so deep inside, versus like, someone inhabited my body and then we went on a quest? I mean, that is kind of what happened, but like there were no dragons, you know what I'm saying?
LP, can I ask a clarifying question before Sameem answers? You said there was a clear protagonist. Is there a clear protagonist?
Who, me?
Yeah. I'm curious. Curious.
I mean, I definitely
protagonist.
I definitely think the host is a clear protagonist until, he's not alone. And then it becomes something different. And and that's one of the things that to me makes the story so cool and unique, is that like, we are seeing everything from his perspective, but like it's from their perspective, but but then they're sharing sensory information. They're sharing corporeal space. And so it becomes it's in a space by itself. Is it first person? Kind of, but it's also kind of third person. And like, that's interesting. I can't think of anywhere I've seen this before. And like, yeah, so Yeah.
Yeah.
Sameem, sorry. Question. How did you decide to go so deep internal? Because, on some level, the story's working on two different levels. The host is doing what the host does, their job. And then Mina comes in and does what she's doing. And it's like, oh, this is interesting. This is weird. This is interesting. This is new. This is different. So how'd you decide to go the way that you went?
I mean, I think some of it is just my writing style, like my natural writing style. Like I if I'm not going to write close first person, I have to work at it. And so I feel like some of it just like, right. Like it actually was very stream of conscious. Most of the story, like there wasn't a lot in it that I planned. I would get to a point where I'm like, oh, I got to go learn about this thing now. And I'd pause and I'd do that, but I didn't get to that point with a lot of planning. So I think like maybe that's why it feels that way. There also, I'm trying to remember, I think when I originally wrote it, it might have been third person past tense. And I think through going through different drafts and getting feedback and whatnot, I rewrote it until it got to this point. And it was one thing that was really challenging was I think trying to write it in past tense and then having flashbacks, and then like being in third person, like there's like it took a lot of different configurations before I realized like, oh, this is how it needs to be.
Yeah.
Otherwise you have to keep saying had so many times in the story that I get annoyed. So when somebody suggested like this needs to be first person present, everything clicked, right. And it got a lot better.
I appreciate that. I'm curious about one, I do want to say that I did read it as two protagonists. And in fact, for me, the auntie felt, I don't know, maybe I just resonated with her character more. So she came out very strongly for me. When you say that you wrote a stream of consciousness, what did that look like for you? Did you just one day sit at your laptop and write the whole story from beginning to end from your thoughts? Or, yeah, how did it go?
Yeah, it wasn't in one go. Like I said, like I think it came out of a prompt in like a writing group meeting, and that was like a lot of like I should probably find the notebook that I like wrote this all on, but I was like writing by hand, very stream of conscious, and then pausing to sort of like think about it a little bit. And that's where like at some point I was like, oh, I have to go cook this thing. Once I realized like I wanted there to be cooking in it. I also didn't know what, and I don't know if I even called her Mina at that point, but what like the guest was going to be doing. Like one of the earlier ideas was like they had like way more nefarious purposes. And like they were cooking something that like maybe was going to be poisonous and we're going to like murder. Like I just didn't know where it was going. And so I think in that sense, it was very stream of conscious. It wasn't like, this is the conclusion, I'm going to work back from it. I was like, I don't know where this is going, but it's fun. And I'm getting to like explore different things. And I think like, I don't want to answer the question of who's the protagonist, but I feel like I was probably initially way more focused on what this guest was doing to the host as a person, and like the experiences and memories that they're invoking in him. So I think in that way, like they're the one, I guess, who like has more of the arc visible in the story, whereas Mina's arc you have to fill in a little bit more, and there's like a lot more like obviously backstory of hers that you have to fill in. But I don't know if that makes her like more or less of a protagonist necessarily. It's a good question.
I find it really cool that it's a question that can be answered many different ways by different people. I think that speaks to what LP was saying earlier about how this is a unique way to bring forth perspective in a story because you're getting both perspectives. I'm also curious because in the last session we had together, you said that your writing has changed a lot since you wrote the story. In what ways do you think it's changed?
I don't know. I think part of the change is that I'm trying to work on a novel. And so while there are pieces of that have been very like stream of consciousness and exploratory, I feel like it's taking a lot more planning and thought and care in some ways. And I don't feel like I'm taking as many risks necessarily. And so I think that might be the biggest thing. I feel like at that stage of writing, especially when writing short fiction, I was more willing to take a risk and do the wrong thing. Right. Like I just said, like I had multiple endings to that story that I didn't like write all the way through, but I was more willing to like explore different options and take some risks. Not necessarily with like the plot, but more with like the style. And so I feel like maybe my style hasn't changed that much once I have like a finished product. But I think in trying to get through this novel, I've had what I feel like is periods of more like rote writing to get from point A to point B. That is not like a final draft at all. And so maybe my style hasn't changed as much. It's more just like I haven't given myself the opportunity to experience that type of writing again. Yeah.
That's cool. Nick.
So I'm curious because this story did come out in 2020, which probably means you wrote it way earlier than that as well. For you, kind of going in the same vein here, what has been the biggest challenge for you in writing an inclusive piece since this one came out?
The biggest challenge in writing a conclusive piece, is that what you said?
Yeah. Because I know you've mentioned a few times that you're more focused on writing characters that you want to see yourself in from your community and things like that. I want to know, I'm curious what's your biggest challenge since this one came out that you faced because you're transitioning to writing novels and things like that.
Honestly, I feel like more of the challenges have been like personal and less like writing oriented. I think that like 2018, I had more time and space to like take writing more seriously as a career. In a way that like post 20 or some point during 2020 became more and more difficult. And then I think the stakes also went up, for better or worse, because I was like trying to do something bigger and longer. And so I think, and that's not to say that like short story writing is easier in any ways, but I feel like there's a shorter feedback loop. So there's like a different type of patience that you need. And I think that's probably been it. Like, I think because I tend to be a very like stream of conscious writer, I can manage a short story in a different way. Whereas like for a novel, I think I might have said this to you all before, like, I feel like I need a project manager. That's like the most difficult part for me is not the writing. It's like managing the writing piece as a project. It's so boring. And so my brain just like shuts off for stuff like that. And I think that's probably like the biggest challenge, like that, along with everything going on in life, ends up being the biggest challenge.
I resonate with a lot of that. So thanks.
Yeah. This is so interesting because the way that you've been answering has me flipping one of the questions I had, which is what you as a writer now would give as advice to the version of you that wrote that story 5 years ago. And I'm kind of curious about what advice you think that version of you would give to you as a writer now.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think it might be just like shut up and write. It's like a big part of it. And yeah. I think the criticism would be like, don't overthink it. That said, I probably took a year to write this short story. Like, it wasn't like continuously sitting down and writing it, but like spent time on it, took like 3 or 4 months off, came back to it. Like, so I don't know that I'm that different between like now and then. So I don't know. I don't know if like that Sameem in 2020 or 2019 would have better advice for me.
Is there any part of you that wants to do a sequel to AirBody? Like, have you ever thought about what the next story, either for Mina or the host or just in the world, would be?
You know, I thought about this in 2020, like when the pandemic was going on, because I wrote the story before the pandemic, before the lockdown. And so I thought about it because it's a use case that would make a lot more sense in the lockdown. And so I did think about like, I don't know if I thought about writing a sequel, but I did think about writing like an epilogue where they're just like Mina's embodied him, but not like really in control, just like there and they're hanging out, smoking a joint, like, and just like watching the news in 2020. But I think, and folks have asked me like, you know, why not take this and write like a full novel? And I feel like I liked the just like taste of the world that I got with the story. And I feel like I would ruin it. I'm not saying it would be ruined necessarily, but I think I would ruin it. I really liked the way that it turned out. I liked the moment that it captured. And I didn't want to like mess with that.
So valid. What is a question that you would ask yourself about this story? Or something that you haven't been asked that you want viewers to know?
I mean, I guess something you said earlier on Shingai was about like there being a twist in the story. And I weirdly like didn't think about it as a twist. It wasn't like my intent going in. I guess it's fine if it's how it turned out, but like I kind of wanted it to feel as normal as possible. And I don't remember how I wrote it now. But I don't feel like I made Arsalan feel like he was as shocked as maybe he could have been. Yeah. So I guess I'm curious to learn more about like that feeling of a twist.
Yeah.
And how folks felt about that.
I like LP's word in the chat, unfurling, because what it did feel like was it felt like a slow burn into revelation, which is, so maybe twist was not the right word, but just realizing why she wanted his body. And you didn't realize, even when she was at the door of, how much of a spoiler can I give? I'm really trying to,
it's been out.
Oh, we've already declared. Spoil it.
Okay. But when she was at the door of her lover's house, and you still don't understand what the relationship is until she's back in the house with, like, they're back in the house, and her lover comes in, knocks on the door, and brings the meal that was cooked for her, and then there's like you start to put two and two together. I just think that like this is a story that could have gone any way, and it was a beautiful way that it went, and it was also unexpected, which I appreciated. Yeah. LP, do you have more to add to the unfolding?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it really just felt like the Arsalan character was just learning more about the tenant in his body, and like he was along for the ride, and so like in a very third person way, he's experiencing like what she's experiencing, and he's able to narrate it from where he is, and but it never. I would never say twist. It felt more elegant than that. It felt more it was more elegant than that. It was more it felt inevitable, right? Like I didn't know what was coming, but what came felt natural. It wasn't gimmicky, and like how it ended, or how it got closer to the ending was actually the same. It all just it rolled, and then it rolled. It didn't roll down a hill. It just rolled like a couple of feet. So like it stopped where you thought it would, but you didn't think that this ball was going to go off course. It was just, I don't know. It was just, it felt natural. I don't know if that's a great literary term for what I'm trying to say.
I like that. I think the thing that I was shocked by is that like you're here in a dynamic between an auntie and a younger character. Were they a man or just like we don't really know, right?
The host was a man.
He was a man. Okay. That's what I assumed.
Yeah.
So for the story to change or to like move into the intimacy of a sapphic relationship that wasn't allowed to be, and they had tried so many ways to be together, but like they just it didn't work. I think it was beautiful. Like it was an unfurling. It did feel like an intimacy that was unexpected, I think, because the dynamics were different between the host and the auntie who had taken over his body, and then the dynamics between her and the person that she was cooking for within his body. So there is an expansiveness there also in the way that you were able to write such different relationship dynamics and have them share space in the same story.
Wow, I love the way you put that. Thanks for answering my question.
Thank you for writing the story.
Thanks for reading it.
Okay, so I got a question for the group.
What's up?
Open-ended. I mean, you don't have to answer this one if you don't. I'm curious what everyone thinks the strength of the story is. And we talk about this during kind of canon episodes and things like that, where all of us kind of write differently. All of us have our different things that we do. I'm curious from your guys' perspective, what is the strength of the story where you say, Sameem, this is your superpower?
Okay, so I haven't read a lot of your work, but what I caught from this story and what I surmise might be the case from some of your other work is that the world building for the novum, the speculative thing that a story has. In some stories, the speculative aspect is the whole thing, but in some stories, the speculative aspect of novum is like a thing that complicates, and then everything else is around it, right? The novum of the story was never explained in any and then a mad scientist comes from around the corner and explains the specificity of AirBody. It was so conversational. And I also noticed in your writing style, while, highlighting things, I was like, Sameem doesn't write, you don't use a lot of particularly flowery language or particularly figurative language. It's really, I want to say direct, but direct isn't the word. It's matter of fact. And like, it's matter of fact without sounding like exposition. And that might be one of Sameem's superpowers. Okay. Shingai?
Hell yeah. I agree with that. Your stories or your work is very easy to get into because it feels like it's inviting you into it. I think the other superpower is what I mentioned. I think you're really good at writing relationship dynamics in a way that shows off the intimacy and also the fear that is associated with the intimacy. I feel like we were able to get to see these characters very clearly. Even by the things that they didn't say as much as by the things that they did say.
I concur. What I noticed on my end is what you're saying without saying things. That's super strong, and it's going to the food for this one for me. You do food so well. And LP has a story where I focused on the food too. When the food dynamic tells you about a person without telling you about the person, I'm so in love with that piece. Like you have a line in there where you're like, basically they just open up a Tupperware, shoved a spoonful of food in someone's mouth. You didn't even describe the food, but that person's reaction to that food and the sensory details you laid on, I was like, I don't know what it is. I gotta have it. Like, what is it? Tell me how to make it. Like, I'm in. Like, and this is 2 sentences that you do this in. So, like, I love it. Like, you do communicating and telling a story without telling the story through actions and physical descriptions and things like that. That's what I pulled from this story is like kind of the superpower of the story here for me that I really like hit on.
I mean, co-sign with the food writing. Like, yeah, as a person who ends up writing food, I really think that is a byproduct of like writing with an eye toward embodiment. And like, I don't know how else this story could have been written. Like, you know, we're talking about feeling your body do things that like you don't will it to do, and you know, turning off your senses so these 2 women can have this moment to themselves, you know, like, and I think that embodiment is part of like what I found really, really compelling about the story. The matter of factness, like once I isolated that while reading, I was like, oh, I wonder how many limes I'm going to end up like highlighting if like it's all matter of fact and tone, but you still manage to say some really beautiful things. And it's not hindered by the fact that like there's some really beautiful lines in there and they're not hindered by the fact that there's not a lot of figurative language. Right. And I realizing like, maybe I relied too heavily on that, but like in yours way, I was like, wow. And it's all those things, right? And there's no twist. It unfurls, but it also manages it to be taut, right? It doesn't feel like it goes on too long. It doesn't feel like any of these scenes are like throwaway or like or that anything's too short. It was just like,
No, I love it. So we're coming up on time. Shingai, do you have any last questions you would like to ask or LP to Sameem?
2 more questions. My first one is, what was your favorite thing about writing the story? And my second one, if you want to just answer them together, is what has been your favorite thing about watching your own writing journey?
Wow, those are good questions. I think the first one, it was, sorry, just trying to remember the question. It was, what was my favorite thing about the writing in the story? Was that it?
Yes, sure. Yeah. About writing the story.
So one thanks for, writing the story. I think one, thank you for saying all those nice things, everyone, about me. Probably stop blushing in a couple of days. I think my favorite thing about writing the story, and I think this is true about a lot of stories, is it was the flashbacks and making the flashbacks sit flush in the story. Is almost like, I don't know, like I think if I was like a woodworker trying to get 2 pieces to fit together and like sanding them down so they look like they're one piece, I just have a lot of fun with those moments. And I think I like insist upon not breaking for flashbacks, just having it sit like very flush in the story. And so I think I've done that in other stories too, but I think I like made a real effort to make that work in this one. Yeah. And then the second question was about my writing journey. Shingai. Was that right?
Yes, it was your favorite thing or the thing that has struck you the most about witnessing your own writing journey, like how you've grown, how you've changed, how you've stayed the same.
Yeah, I think getting to a point where I felt comfortable writing a story the way I would want to read it and not the way I think other folks would want to read it. And I think that took like a lot of years of on and off exploring writing and trying. But I think it was somewhere in that, like, you know, where I was in like 2018 or 2019 where I hit it. I wrote this like flash piece that was, again, a response to a prompt from an amazing writing group partner. This was like during the wildfires, I think in 2018, where we've just been masking for a while because of the wildfires in California. And the prompt was, what if life was like that all the time? And so I ended up writing a flash piece about someone who's trying to make it home before their nanny has to leave, or else their nanny's probably going to quit. And it's not the first time this has happened. And their like mask batteries, their mask is running out of batteries because there's like a proactive filter on it. And I think that was the first time where I got the right mix, or when I finished the story, I got the right mix of like the language that I wanted to use and the characters that I wanted to be visible. And it was, you know, it was only like 1,000 words, but when I saw that come together, I was like, oh, I can do this. And I wrote it the way I wanted to read it. And look, there's other people who want to read it that way too. That's cool.
Amazing.
I like it. Shingai, thank you for preparing the questions tonight and leading this discussion here. Sameem, thanks for being in the hot seat. I know it's always not the funnest, but, you know, we get to talk about you and celebrate you, and that's what we like to do, so deal with it.
Thank you.
Shingai, you know your turn's coming. So just want to throw that warning out there right now. We'll be able to talk about your novelette once it comes out there. Last question to wrap everything up here. What keeps you just writing?
Me?
Yeah.
Specifically?
You specifically, Sameem.
I think there are stories that haven't been told that I want to read. And therefore I have to write them. And I think that's a big thing that keeps me writing. I think it's what led me to write AirBody and pretty much anything else I've ever written. I feel like even the stories I've written that I'm like, this sucks, I'm like, well, I also haven't seen anybody else write this, so at least it's unique. And I'm going to keep doing that.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers by writers to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.